Hi, I've got an AM1 socket motherboard, which is actually an MSI AM1i with a Sempron 3850 processor in it. Now this is a poverty grade setup dating from around 2012. It's actually been very reliable, and for most normal things it's perfectly okay. I don't play games, and it's fine. You know, the processor's got built-in graphics. But now what I'm doing is some fluid simulation using a GTX Titan Black, and that's putting a lot of strain on the whole system, and I suspect the Sempron is holding it back somewhat, if not the motherboard itself. But I saw there was an Athlon 5350 for only £35, and there are some performance stats like this when you compare the two that made me think, well, this could be a worthwhile upgrade. So I got it. So what I'm going to do first is do a performance assessment of the Sempron 3850, do the upgrade, and then do the test again with the Athlon processor in. Okay, let's use Cinebench, and it takes quite a long time between starting the rendering process and actually displaying the first frames. So I'll cut a chunk out there. Here you can see there's each core has got its own little square that it's working on, and here the first core has just reached the end of its first little box, so it started its next one. Now when we look at the final results, which took a long time, we can see that the performance is really slow compared to almost everything else, including even slower than some 2-core systems there. But that's because it's a budget processor. Right, so here's the motherboard, and you can see this microscopic little heatsink and fan, 25 watt TDP. Yeah, well, from what I've discovered so far, it appears that you can't remove the heatsink easily from above. You've got to get below it. So I'm going to have to remove the whole motherboard in order to do that, which is a bit annoying, but there we go. Okay, here's the old processor, the Sempron 3850. In fact, getting the heatsink off, it may be that I didn't need to take the whole motherboard out, which I've done there, because we've used enough force. This is basically that goes underneath the motherboard, and this bit goes on top. So anyway, here's my 5350, so I'm going to install that now. Why is that not going in?
Yes, fair choice to make, I believe.
So one bit I annoyingly forgot to film was the fact that the pins were bent on the new processor. They hadn't really been packed adequately, to be honest, in the post. Really should have been put in some kind of foam to keep the pins a fixed distance from each other, and they got slightly bent, presumably in transit. And that really kind of highlights the point about zero insertion force sockets. They really should be zero insertion force. If there's any kind of having to push them or anything like that, then there's something wrong. Fortunately, I was able to bend the pen. You couldn't see it in the video either, but when I bent when I looked really close, I could see that some of the pins were bent, and I bent them back very gently, and they went in fine. And that's just something to bear in mind. If the processor won't go in and lie flat easily, then you need to take it out and look very carefully at all the pins. Okay, so I've cleaned my heatsink and blown all the dust out, and that's pretty smooth now, so I'm going to now apply a bit of a Casa AK450, which I've used before, and that seems to be quite good. What's interesting to note about this is how much smaller the centre of the heatsink is compared to the surface of the processor. And I guess the processor is only that big because of all the pins underneath. Right, I've got it in, but it's actually really quite tricky, and you've got to be really careful not to use force in a way that will bend the motherboard or break it. So I'm hoping that should be all good now. Okay, everything's back, everything's plugged in, the main powering, the CPU power, there's only one socket for that, the CPU fan, the graphics card. Oh, I haven't plugged the power things in for that yet, so better do that. Where's me? Okay, did it do anything? Oh, okay. F1 to 1 setup, F2, F1. Okay, so because it detects a new processor, I guess, it wanted to start again. Okay, let's see what happens. This isn't what I wanted, so I'm going to have to wait till George comes back from football and get his help, I think, unless I can sort it out myself in the meantime. Hooray, it's loading Windows at last. What I had to do was restore optimized defaults. I'm really not sure what I did that upset the upset it so that it went into the shell, the EFI shell, but anyway, now that works, which is all good. So here we go, and difficult to tell at the moment if it's really any faster or not. I think a lot of the thing is due to this green hard drive, which is relatively slow. It hardly produces any heat at all, but it's also quite slow. So anyway, I'm going to do some experiments in a minute to see what works. Okay, let's run Cinebench again, and what I've done here, from the point where they both started producing, rendering the picture, I put the both processors next to each other so you can see how they perform. And in fact, the Athlon wasn't really a lot faster, to be honest. Let's take a quick look at that fantastic image, which is all computer generated. You can see that the Athlon was about 1.77 times as fast as the Sempron, still pretty slow in fact compared to almost everything else, and about 50 times slower than that Intel Xeon Platinum at the top. But then again, it was about 100 times more to buy. Something else I'm going to show you now. Look at the speed it's rattling through some of those. But look at this, the hard drive is only 28 degrees, and I told you that's a low energy drive already, but the CPU is only 27, and that's when it's being maxed out on Cinebench. So that's even lower than the hard drive with that tiny little heatsink and fan. And that really just shows you how little power this CPU consumes. So okay, that project's now complete, and it's gone pretty well actually in the end. It's not 4 times as fast as I'd hoped, but it is it's 70% faster, which is actually quite a good speed increase for for about 35 quid. And subjectively it definitely feels more responsive as well, so that's nice. So yeah, definitely a worthwhile upgrade.